Right, so news hitting the mainstream media today talks of cuts to the education budget of some £500 million, which is bad enough when you consider the sort of cuts we're talking about here. Ending universal free school meals for infants, doing away with period products in schools, both measures that do nothing to support the children of this country but actively attack them instead and damage their prospects for the future. But this story is so much worse than just that, because there's some background to all of this that he's putting in context that the mainstream media are not talking about so much. The school's budget already faces a £700 million shortfall. 90% of secondary schools and 74% of primary school budgets will not stretch far enough. And it is wage packets that the shortfall is going to fall on. So on one hand, these new cuts are coming to pay teaching wages. But even that isn't the whole story, because that £700 million shortfall, well, Rachel Reeves has just given that sum of money away for tax breaks. So let's talk about how necessary these cuts really are, and what Reeves has actually prioritised over our children. Because what it exposes is the cowardice of this government, seemingly only big and brave enough to punch down yet again on our kids. Right, so let's not pretend the hollowed out husk of what was once the Labour Party is any longer the party of public services and social justice in the interests of ordinary working class people, because what we have now is another Tory party, isn't it? And for those that still complain about that comparison being made, we're seeing school budgets being cut effectively so that Rachel Reeves can, it seems, fund some tax breaks. These school cuts being reported today reveal the very much Tory-esque true priorities of this Labour in name-only government under Keir Starmer's leadership. Fiscal cowardice in the face of Donald Trump's trade threats, for it is they that these tax breaks are associated with, and a willingness to sacrifice the education and well-being of British children in order to deliver on that. It has recently been reported, and indeed I did a video on this the other week, that there is a £700 million shortfall in school budgets. Here's a short excerpt from Schools Week to explain the situation on this first of all, if you didn't catch my other video. Schools face a £700 million funding gap next year, with 3 in 4 primary schools and almost all secondaries facing not being able to meet costs, new analysis from the Union School Cuts Coalition suggests. Union leaders warn school cuts are expected to rise by 3.4% next year, while mainstream funding will increase by just 2.2%. It echoes recent warnings from the Institute for Fiscal Studies that increases in school costs will outstrip the government's recent funding boost. The Departments for Education recently admitted that most schools will need to supplement additional funding allocated at the autumn budget with efficiencies in order to afford a proposed 2.8% pay rise from next September. No extra money to pay for salaries, so this shortfall primarily affects salaries, making it harder for schools to retain staff. Prioritising the kids is what the schools will always do. But that still leaves the vast majority of schools in this country with a funding problem that must be resolved, and they're being left to their own devices to do it. The £500 million in school cuts being reported today going somewhat to plugging that. Still £200 million short as it is though, but I'm going to come back to that in a moment. Let's come back to the £700 million figure first. That figure could be plugged immediately without any cuts to schools, as announced today, if Rachel from Accounts so desired. But she doesn't. She has another priority, and coincidentally, it costs £700 million as well, proving my point. Choices. Reeves is choosing to dump on our kids' education and school experience yet again to pay for something else. And when that something else is tax breaks, you become acutely aware that we really do still have a Tory government and nothing has changed. But these tax breaks are also a display of utter cowardice on the part of Starmer's government. You see, the £700 million shortfall in the school's budget coincides exactly with £700 million in tax breaks being offered by Chancellor Rachel Reeves to US tech giants in a bid to avoid a trade war with Donald Trump. She hopes. This is completely reliant on Trump being some sort of reasonable person. What you'll see is the UK rolling over after he slaps tariffs on us. Tariffs on our steel and aluminium, as he's already done. And therefore, he's going to be incentivised to hit us with even more tariffs, thinking he can get more tax breaks. When every other country and trade bloc has stood up to Trump when he's done this to them, Starmer and co are still licking his boots. And as Reeves told Laura Koonsberg on her Sunday morning Tory love-in that passes for a politics show on the BBC, Reeves repeatedly refused to rule out scrapping the digital services tax on US companies, which is worth about £700 million to the Exchequer. The digital services tax was introduced by the Tories in April of 2020 to ensure that global digital businesses paid tax that reflected the value they derived from UK customers. It's a flat 2% tax applied to companies that have global revenues in excess of 500 million and is applied on revenues derived from the UK. Reeves is now looking at scrapping this for US companies, effectively giving in to Trump's tariffs in the hope he won't apply anymore. The £700 million tax break for US tech firms is a desperate attempt by the Labour government to avoid retaliatory tariffs from Donald Trump, who has already imposed duties on UK steel and aluminium. Rather than standing up to his economic bullying, Labour has chosen to placate him instead, with school kids seemingly being the ones paying the price via their education, school budgets unfulfilled by that exact same amount, effectively making children pay for the government's fear of Trump. So how will Trump respond then? Expect more tariffs, I expect. Trump responds to strength. Like all bullies, he keeps punching down on weakness, and Starmer's government are clearly weaklings, and punishing kids to pay for this only rubber stamps that truth. This is a deliberate, conscious choice. The government could easily, as we can see here now, cover the school funding gap completely just by refusing to kowtow to US corporate interests. Instead, they have decided that tech giants deserve tax relief more than British children deserve a decent education. So with Reeves set to give in to Trump and in effect make our kids pay for it, £700 million shortfall here that we won't plug to pay for £700 million of tax breaks there. Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson has therefore now proposed £500 million in further education cuts to fill the gap left by the original shortfall. Still £200 million short of doing that. This is what is being reported by some media outlets today. So what else are kids now going to lose as a result of this move? This is not fiscal responsibility, after all. This is not running the country in the national interest. This is failing the next generation. This is political cowardice, and it must be called out as such. So what is Bridget Phillipson's solution then? Well, it's to make a bad situation even worse. Because her proposed cuts that she's put on the table apparently include scrapping universal free school meals for infants, making them means-tested as they are for older children, so now even the very youngest will risk going hungry as the cost of living crisis for us all keeps worsening. Phillipson has also apparently suggested ending free period products for schoolgirls, despite the well-documented link between period poverty and school absenteeism, a matter of dignity as this is. Also on the chopping block is the cutting of PE, music and dance programmes, depriving children of creative and physical extracurricular outlets, which are, in my view, critical for development. Also apparently under consideration is the abolition of the Turing scheme, which came into being following Brexit as a watered-down version of the Erasmus scheme, which enables UK students to study abroad, limiting their opportunities all over again to study further afield. These are not efficiency savings, as they are being sold. These are catastrophic and utterly unnecessary cuts. These are choices that will ensure that inequality is baked into the education system from the very earliest years, and Labour cowardice is what is actually behind it. They are terrified of Trump's tariffs, so much that they are willing to hand £700 million to Silicon Valley rather than risk a trade dispute, which is likely to come anyway as Trump realises the UK can very much be pushed around. They refuse to retaliate against US steel tariffs like, for instance, the EU have, leaving British industry exposed whilst bending the knee to American corporate power. And yet they have no qualms about taking £700 million from schools, knowing full well that the consequences of that, which are larger class sizes, fewer teachers, more hungry children, will be borne by those least able to fight back. They are cowards. This government are cowards. This government would have us believe that these cuts are unavoidable, that there is simply no money left after years of economic calamity, and as we see them spend more and more on defence and giving cash away to Ukraine, it just exposes the lie. It exposes everything they do or say on the economy as a lie. The £700 million tech tax proves the money exists. That's money that could be given to the schools instead of being given to Silicon Valley, given to placate Trump. It could be redirected to the schools. But instead it's going to go to corporations in the US. Labour could reverse Tory-era tax cuts for the wealthy, or even introduce a wealth tax as an alternative, a notion that seems to elicit an allergic reaction in Rachel Reeves. But that isn't on the table either. It's just cuts after cuts. They could impose a windfall tax on tech giants as a take-that Trump move, flexing some muscle at him, pushing back, knowing trade with the EU is of greater economic benefit to the UK anyway, and show some courage and leadership, rather than handing them relief and wringing your hands saying, please don't inflict more tariffs on us, Mr. Trump. Labour are full of talk of making tough choices, hard choices, but as always, like the watery, spineless entities they have chosen the path of least resistance. Take from the poor to give to the powerful. This is not just about budgets. It's about what kind of country we want to be as well. One that invests in the future, invests in the next generation, or one that sacrifices its children at the altar of corporate greed and political cowardice, taking food from the mouths of babes to give to Donald Trump, because that is where we are. For more on the £700 million cuts to education and the reasons surrounding that, along with the scale of schools affected, please do check out this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you have not already done so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as supporting the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated. And I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.